Hello from Blue Collar Bobbers. It's October 8th, 2017, and it's getting to be cold outside, so now is the time we get the bug to design new kits. We've had so many requests for these Honda Shadow 1100s that we thought we'd grab a few of them and get started on the kits here. Now, before we get started, this is the Spirit model, the Spirit 1100 Shadow. To me, it's just a butt-ugly bike. It's dated. But underneath all that ugly exterior, there's a beautiful interior. So let's get started on this thing. Before we get going, we want to make sure we have a jack of some kind to jack the one side of the bike up. All we have to do is just jack a little bit up on the right side just so we can remove the shock to get the chrome strips off the back. And then the other item you want to have is a roll-around chair. You'll see ours there, the blue Goodyear chair. It just makes working on these bikes so much more fun. Let's get going. The first thing we want to do is tie our kickstand. Just grab a piece of rope or a heavy bungee cord or something, and let's tie this up because you don't want the bike to slide forward and fall off the kickstand. So this is really important to tie that kickstand before we get going. The first thing we want to remove is the seat and the sissy bar, or the little backrest that this bike had. Now, if your bike doesn't have a backrest, then you'll just remove this screw and take the seat off. If it does have the little backrest, then you'll have to remove these two screws, I think, first. Take that sissy bar off, backrest off, and then remove this acorn nut and take the seat off. Next, we'll remove these two screws. This one and this one. Then the seat comes right off. Before we remove the fender, we want to disconnect all these wires from this cable assembly here under the seat. Now, first thing, I want to get rid of this big boot because it's really hard to get to the connectors very well with that big boot on there. So I just cut that off. I'll show you. This is what it looks like. You can just carefully take some scissors and cut from the inside, or if you do a knife, make sure you take it from the inside and cut it up. That way you won't cut the wires underneath. And then I've unplugged these ahead of time, but these are the wires that we want to unplug. These. There's probably about, maybe 6 wires there. You can also take some pliers and grab a hold of these little metal connectors here. When you pull these out, just kind of rotate them and be careful not to pull on the wires too much, or you may pull the connector off the end of the wire. So let's disconnect all these wires. There's these coming from the tail light here, and then the others are from the signal lights. Take them all out of this section. You can bend these little tabs on the signal light wires here to remove those from the frame on both sides. Now, to remove the fender, we want to remove these 3 screws, this one, and this one. This bike has had an extension put on the signal light, so your signal light might be up in here a little bit. But now, as that fender drops down, be careful because there's one connector up in front that we want to disconnect after that fender drops down. So don't try to pull the fender out. It won't come out without disconnecting that wire. I'll show you that once this drops down a little bit. I've lowered that fender down once the bolts are taken out. And I want to show you that little connector that we have to remove before we can take the fender out of the wheel section. It's right there. I'm going to disconnect it and then show you on the next frame how you take that off. Okay, there's a little plastic tab just ahead of that. See that dark little metal tab there? Right ahead of that, there's a little plastic tab. You just push that on, push on it with your fingernail, or a little screwdriver or something, and you should be able to just lift that connector right off there. Let me see if I can do it here for you. Here it comes. Should slide right off just like that. Now, once this is disconnected, we can slide the fender out of the motorcycle. Man, that's an improvement. That fender is ugly. We want to save this wire here for future connections on our lights. So go ahead and just bend these tabs up and then cut this wire right here, and we'll pull this out and we'll save this section of wire for later. So one has the little connectors on the ends. In order to remove the chrome bars from the back of the bike, we're going to have to jack the bike up just a little bit. We don't even really need to get the tire off the ground, just enough to get the tension off the shocks. So go ahead and slide your floor jack under the side of the bike, and I'll show you where to do it. We're going to hook the jack under the frame, not the pipe, but the frame. And these little tabs on your floor jack, just loop those under the frame there so that it won't slide out. It's important that that jack is in there, like I say, so it won't slide out if the bike tips a little bit or if the jack moves. First we'll remove the top screw. Be sure to keep the washer. Then we'll remove the bottom screw. As remove the bottom screw, you can pump the jack just a little bit to raise the bike just a tad. That'll make that bottom screw come out a lot easier. Go ahead and back the screw out and then raise the jack until that screw comes out. Just enough to where it'll come out and slide out. If you go too high, it won't come out. If it's too low, it won't come out. So you'll reach that point where that screw will just come right out just like that. And then we'll go ahead and remove this shock. That was a little stubborn, but we got her. Watch your floor jack. Make sure it doesn't bleed off and let the bike go too low. Next, we have to remove this big bolt right here. Now, I've got a 15/16 American size socket. I can get this off without shoving it all the way onto the square part of the socket wrench. That way it'll go over the bolt and we can take it off that way. You can also use a 15/16 box end wrench, and a 24mm wrench would be ideal. And then as a last resort, we can use a crescent wrench. Just make sure you get the crescent wrench good and tight on there. Make sure it's good and tight, and then push down on it as you loosen it. We want to remove this bolt. That way we can get this chrome strip off. We've removed the big chrome strip on this side, and now what we want to do is we want to grab that big old bolt that we just took out. This is the threaded side, and what we want to do is in the kit we give you 4 large washers, 2 for each side. So what we're going to do, we're going to slide 1, 2 of the big washers. We need that space to replicate the space that the chrome strip left on the other side. And then go ahead and screw that back in there. We're going to go ahead and tighten that up, and then we'll put our shock on this side. We're going to also keep these wires that go to the signal lights on the Spirit. So what you do, you just pry these little clips open, cut the wire about there. That should be plenty of wire, and then pull those out. Do both sides. So you should have 2 wires, pretty long, that are left over, and they have the green and orange and green and blue connectors on them. We'll keep those for future when we would do our new lights. I've installed the shock on this side. Go ahead and slide this on first. Make sure you put the washer on the bolt on that, and then on this side, on the bottom, you may want to raise or lower the bike just a little bit until that bolt slides in there and screws in real easily. So go ahead and, like I say, raise the jack just a little bit up or down. That bolt goes straight in, and then snug that one up. And then we're going to go ahead and repeat the same thing on the other side. The only difference on the other side is it has a little bit different mounting bolt on the bottom, but it's basically just the same as this side. So do this side first, put the shock back on, and then do the other side. And that's it for that operation. Man, this bike is looking better already.